Rowan Bennett had learned, over the 3 years since his wife passed, that grief had a way of making ordinary Saturdays feel like small victories worth celebrating. Getting his twin daughters, Poppy and Daisy, fed and dressed and out the door for pancakes at Maple Street Diner, without anyone crying, including himself, counted as a genuinely good morning these days. He was 34 years old, ran a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, and had built his entire life, quietly and without complaint, around the 2 5-year-olds who still asked, every so often when Mommy was coming home from heaven. The diner was crowded that morning, unusually so, a line nearly out the door, every table occupied except for the small four-top by the window that Rowan had managed to snag right as another family was leaving. Poppy and Daisy climbed into the booth, already arguing cheerfully about whether chocolate chip or blueberry pancakes were superior, and Rowan slid in across from them, grateful as he often was these days for the simple mercy of a functioning morning. He noticed the girl by the door almost immediately, mostly because everyone else seemed determined not to. She looked to be around 16, maybe 17, standing awkwardly near the hostess stand on a pair of forearm crutches, one pant leg pinned neatly below the knee where her right leg should have been. She was scanning the crowded diner with the particular tightness of someone trying very hard not to look as uncomfortable as she clearly felt, watching table after table of strangers avoid meeting her eyes, watching the hostess apologize, with visible discomfort that there simply wasn't a free table for one. Rowan watched 2 separate families glance at her, register her crutches and her missing leg with the kind of quick, guilty pity that somehow felt worse than open rudeness, and then deliberately look away, unwilling to offer the empty half of their booth. He felt something tighten uncomfortably in his chest, an old familiar anger at the small cruelties people committed simply by looking away when looking away was easier than kindness. The girl finally worked up the nerve to approach a nearby table of 2 elderly women, asking something quiet that Rowan couldn't quite hear, and watched the women shake their heads apologetically, gesturing at their already crowded plates and bags as if the booth genuinely couldn't accommodate one more person, which it plainly could. She turned next toward Rowan's table, visibly bracing herself for another rejection, and something in Rowan simply refused to let that happen twice in front of his own daughters. "There's room right here," he said, before she'd even finished forming the question, sliding down the booth bench to make more space and gesturing to the empty spot beside him. "If you don't mind sitting," with 2 very opinionated 5-year-olds, debating pancake toppings, that is. The girl blinked, clearly startled by the immediate, uncomplicated yes. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your family breakfast." "You're not intruding," Rowan said simply. "You're joining it. Sit down before." Poppy starts explaining her entire ranking system for pancake flavors. It takes a while. A small surprised laugh escaped her, some of the tension visibly leaving her shoulders as she carefully maneuvered herself into the booth, propping her crutches against the wall beside her with practiced efficiency. "I'm Ivy," she offered once she'd settled. "Rowan," he said, "and this chaos is Poppy and Daisy." Poppy, 5 years old and entirely without a filter, studied Ivy's crutches with open curiosity rather than pity, the particular blunt honesty that children possess before the world teaches them to look away. "What happened to your leg?" "Poppy," Rowan started, ready to gently redirect. But Ivy simply smiled and shook her head, unbothered. "It's okay, I don't mind the question," Ivy said, addressing Poppy directly with the same easy warmth she might have used with an adult. "I had cancer in my leg when I was 12. The doctors had to take it off to stop the cancer from spreading. I've had this new leg situation for 4 years now." "Does it hurt?" Daisy asked, equally direct. "Not anymore," Ivy said. "Took some getting used to, but I get around pretty well now. I even still play wheelchair basketball on weekends." The girls, satisfied with these answers in the straightforward way children usually were, returned their attention to the pressing matter of pancake toppings, inviting Ivy into their debate with the casual generosity kids extend before anyone teaches them prejudice. Rowan watched Ivy's shoulders continue to relax through the rest of breakfast, watched her laugh genuinely at Poppy's increasingly elaborate pancake ranking criteria, watched something in her posture unclench that had clearly been braced for rejection, since she'd walked through the diner's door. Over the course of that hour, Rowan learned pieces of Ivy's story, and the unhurried way conversation unfolds over shared pancakes. She was 17, a senior at the local high school, living in the group home 2 blocks from the diner because her mother had struggled with addiction throughout Ivy's childhood, and her father had never been part of the picture at all. She'd been in foster care off and on since she was 14, bounced between placements that rarely lasted more than a year, made harder, she admitted quietly, by the fact that potential foster families often hesitated once they learned about her prosthetic leg and the ongoing medical needs that came with it. People say they don't mind, Ivy said, picking at the last of her pancakes, but then they find a reason it doesn't work out a few months later. I've stopped taking it personally, mostly. Rowan felt that familiar tightness return to his chest, sharper this time, thinking of his own daughters, thinking of how different Ivy's entire childhood had been from theirs, thinking of a 17-year-old girl who'd learned to expect rejection so consistently that she'd built armor around herself even while ordering pancakes with strangers on an ordinary Saturday morning. Their loss, he said simply, and meant it completely. Ivy looked at him for a long moment, something uncertain and hopeful flickering behind her eyes, like she wasn't quite sure what to do with unguarded kindness that didn't come with some hidden expiration date. Most people don't say that so easily. Most people are wrong, Rowan said. That breakfast wasn't a single tidy turning point, though it felt, even at the time, like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. Rowan found himself returning to Maple Street diner more regularly over the following weeks, and more often than not, Ivy was there too, having mentioned, almost shyly, that she often came in on weekend mornings when the group home felt too crowded and impersonal. Poppy and Daisy adored her without reservation, delighted every time their father suggested Ivy join them, and Ivy, for her part, began arriving with small, thoughtful things for the girls: a hair ribbon she'd noticed Daisy admiring, a picture book she'd found at a used bookstore that featured a character who used a wheelchair, small gestures that spoke of someone paying careful, generous attention despite having so little material means of her own. Rowan learned over those weeks that Ivy was quietly remarkable in ways the world had mostly failed to notice, maintaining a nearly perfect GPA despite the instability of her home situation, working a part-time job at the local library to save money for community college, coaching a youth wheelchair basketball team on Saturday afternoons with a patience and warmth that reminded him achingly of the mother his own daughters had lost too young. It was Poppy, characteristically blunt, who finally said out loud what Rowan had been quietly circling for weeks without fully admitting it to himself. "Daddy," she announced one evening at dinner, entirely unprompted, "can Ivy be our sister? She's really good at pancakes and she doesn't make me eat the crust." Daisy nodded vigorously in agreement, and Rowan found himself laughing, though something underneath the laugh had gone suddenly, seriously thoughtful. He didn't act on it rashly. He spent the following month making careful, deliberate inquiries, meeting with Ivy's caseworker, learning the specific realities of what fostering a 17-year-old with ongoing medical needs would actually require, being honest with himself about whether he was doing this from a place of genuine capacity to care for another child, or simply from the raw, well-meaning emotion of watching his daughters love someone who deserved love back. He talked to his own mother, who had helped him enormously since his wife's passing, asking if she thought he was capable of this, if it was fair to Poppy and Daisy, if it was fair to Ivy herself to bring her into a household already carrying its own grief. His mother, practical and warm in equal measure, had simply asked him one question in response. "Do you love her already, Rowan?" Not romantically, obviously, but as a father loves a daughter. Rowan had realized, somewhat to his own surprise, that the answer had been yes for weeks already, quietly and without fanfare, the same steady certainty he'd felt the moment he first held Poppy and Daisy as newborns. He asked Ivy formally on a Tuesday evening, nervous in a way he hadn't been since proposing to his late wife, nearly a decade earlier, sitting across from her at the same booth in Maple Street diner where they'd first met, the twins conspicuously absent for what he'd explained. To them was grown-up conversation time with their grandmother. I want to talk to you about something serious, Rowan began, and watched Ivy's expression immediately brace itself, the old defensive posture returning instinctively, clearly bracing for some kind of gentle letdown, some version of the goodbye she'd learned to expect from every adult who'd shown her kindness before. You don't have to explain, Ivy said quietly, already reaching for her crutches. I understand if things have gotten complicated or if this was too much. Ivy, Rowan interrupted gently, I'd like to become your legal guardian. I'd like you to come live with us permanently, if that's something you'd want. Not because Poppy and Daisy asked me to, though they did repeatedly, but because somewhere over these last 2 months, I stopped thinking of you as someone we happened to share a table with, and started thinking of you as my daughter. I should have said something sooner. I was trying to make sure I could actually give you the stability you deserve before I said anything that might disappoint you. For a long moment, Ivy simply stared at him, and then without any warning, she began to cry, not the careful, guarded tears of someone managing her emotions in public, but something deeper and more unguarded than Rowan had ever seen from her. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to actually mean it when they said that, Ivy said finally, voice thick. Every single placement, every foster family. There was always some reason it didn't work out eventually. I stopped believing anyone actually wanted to keep me around permanently. I mean it, Rowan said simply. Completely. However long it takes for you to believe it. The legal process took nearly 5 months, filled with home visits and paperwork and the particular bureaucratic patience required of the foster system. But by the following autumn, Ivy Bennett, she'd chosen entirely of her own accord to take his last name and was officially, permanently part of the family, older sister to 2 delighted 5-year-olds who had gotten exactly what they'd asked for. Months earlier at that same diner booth, Ivy graduated high school the following spring with the same near-perfect GPA she'd maintained through years of instability. Rowan and the twins sitting in the front row cheering loud enough to embarrass her, holding a homemade sign that read "Our Sister" in Poppy's enthusiastic, uneven handwriting. She started community college that fall, still coaching her youth wheelchair basketball team on weekends, still coming home most evenings, to a house full of noise and pancake debates and the particular chaotic warmth of a family that had been built unexpectedly out of one ordinary Saturday morning small act of kindness. Years later, when people asked Ivy about her family, she rarely mentioned the specifics of paperwork or legal, guardianship or the technical process of adoption. She simply told them about a stranger who, on a crowded Saturday morning, slid down a diner booth and made room for a seat nobody else would offer her, and in doing so, gave her something she'd stopped believing was possible to find. Not just a place to sit, but a family that meant it when they said she belonged.